So do you remember in the last episode, I asked you a question. When was the last time your faith surprised you? I want us to reflect on that a little bit today, particularly for this episode. But first, I want to also paint a picture. And you tell me if you recognize this person. So this is the person in the pew on a Sunday. They know the Mass well. When to sit, when to stand, when to kneel. They know all the responses because they've been doing it for most of their life. They know the smell of the church, the sound of the bells. They even have a little light that comes from a particular window. They're familiar with that light too. Because on a Sunday morning or evening, church is home for them. But outside of that building, outside of the Sunday morning ritual, when they are at work, or if they have gatherings with family, or they go to a sports bar to hang out with friends, and a conversation comes up, something that's real, something that turns in them, their faith goes quiet. Not because they have nothing to say, but because they've never really quite learned how to carry their faith with them and how to share just what they know. What causes this hesitance? Maybe for some people it could be because they've been hurt by the church, the very church they love. Something somebody said to them, something that they experienced that they found to be very inhospitable. Maybe it's one of the hypocrisies that they witness almost every time and they're ashamed of it. I know people have a way of bringing up topics and targeting you, knowing that you sit in the pew. So they have this hurt and they have this shame and they have nowhere to take it. Because the church is also the only place they know where to bring that. So they go back to Mass and they sit and they stay and they keep all this experience to themselves. I know that person. I can relate to that person very well in more ways than I am really willing to admit. And that person has a name. I am calling that person the Pewist. Welcome to Growing Beyond the Pews. I am Andrew Fernandes, and this is episode 2. Last episode I gave the conditional name, pew paralysis. Today I want to give the person name, because once you can name where you are, then you can begin to understand where you're going. The word Pewist, I coined it. I made it up. You won't find it in any theology book or in any other teaching. Well, not to my knowledge. A Pewist is a Catholic who loves God, who shows up faithfully and carries more faith than they realize, but has never really been given the tools or the formation or even the encouragement to take what they know beyond the pews. The pew was never meant to be the destination. The Pewist now is not a bad Catholic. It's not a lukewarm Catholic. In my experience, they could be one of the sincerest people in any room. They witness the faith. They just hesitate when it comes to sharing it. And for reasons that could make complete sense if you understand where they are coming from. Now, I say all of this from within my own experience, because I was one, and I still am, to be honest with you. I grew up in the faith. I did everything that I was taught, the sacraments, the devotions. I was part of parish groups. I was a good Catholic boy, even though I went to a public school. I thought I knew my faith, and I thought I knew it well. But life shakes you. And throughout my entire life, I had my doubts. I had my questions. But what made a change for me, I had the opportunity later on in my life to attend theology school. I mean, that's a story by itself, how I got there, but let's just make this point. And in the first year, sitting in a room with people preparing for priesthood, religious life, with lay people who've been battling with these very same questions I myself had, I had to unlearn almost everything I thought I knew. Not because that was wrong, but because I had been holding it only at surface level. It wasn't that deep as I thought. You see, I had the words, but I just didn't have the roots. The thing that never left me though, looking around that room and thinking that the people sitting in the pew, they are not receiving what I am receiving here in this lecture hall. The ordinary Catholic, the ordinary person in the ordinary parish who live ordinary lives may not have access to this information. And without it, in my opinion, their faith can only go so far. I mean, Hosea has it right. For a lack of knowledge, my people perish. And that's not a judgment. That's just true. And it became the reason why I started to do what I'm doing now. Here's something. And this is something we don't talk about enough honestly in the church. Huh? We have questions. We, the people in the pew, we have questions, and real questions. Not the polite kind of questions you'll ask in a group meeting or in a Bible study group or when you come together in a ministry. I'm talking about the kind of questions that could keep you up at night. The kind of questions that if you only ask it out loud, you're not sure how it will be received. You know, questions like, how come sometimes the homily doesn't really speak to me? Or why do I feel something real at Mass, and then by Monday, Tuesday, it's all gone? Who do I go to when I don't understand the gospel message or the homily message? Not just from an intellectual level, but in terms of my life, my real life, my marriage, my job, my social relationships, even in my own grief, my real lived situations. Who do I go to? In a Caribbean context, we know that we were not raised to ask those questions aloud. Faith was inherited, not interrogated. You went to Mass because your parents went. You received your sacraments because that's just what you had to do. The faith was passed on beautifully in Catholic schools, especially when priests and nuns ran things. The faith was passed on through the rosary at home, through the 9-night prayers and the vigils and the novenas, where sometimes the whole community comes together and they prayed. And they pray in a way that would move you to the core. But the asking of questions, I mean the real, honest, searching, sometimes uncomfortable questions, that wasn't part of the deal. So we go to Mass, hoping that this Sunday something in the homily will reach us, will touch us where we are. Sometimes it does, And when it does, we hold on to it. But when it doesn't, we go home with more questions than we came with, and still know where to take them. Here's another thing most of us were never told. The Mass comes from the Latin word for sending, and I hope I get this right. Ite missa est. Go, you are sent. Every time the priest says, go, at the end of Mass. That's not his polite way of finishing the Mass. That is actually an instruction. We have been attending our own commissioning and recommissioning every Sunday of our lives and never knew it. Then there's another kind of experience, a painful one at times, and maybe the hardest part of being a Pewist. During your regular week, the world comes at you and they ask you these questions about the church, about the scandals you see in the news, about the hypocrisies that you yourself witness with your own eyes, the things that don't really add up, for the average person, especially those who are secular. And we can't respond to them, or we hesitate, not because we don't want to, but because we were never formed to. So at those times, we go quiet, or we try to disconnect, or redirect the conversation. And somewhere inside, we absorb a little more hurt, perhaps a little more shame. And then we go back to the pews on our Sunday. That quiet, wounded faithfulness, that deserves more than we even give it. Let me share how I was able to move, and I'll keep it brief. And when I say move, I say that very cautiously, because I didn't feel at the time like I was growing. I felt like I was just being nudged out of my comfort zone. It wasn't dramatic. No big vision, no dream, no retreat breakthrough. Those things have their purpose, of course, but for me it was simpler than that. I was asked. Yeah, that is it. As simple as that, I was asked. Someone saw something in me I didn't see in my own self. And they said, come and help. Come and share what you know. And I want to be honest with you, I didn't volunteer. I didn't even feel ready, because even during that time, I was still journeying, but confused. But with that, I had to be called, because I didn't know what I knew. I was what you call a drop-off dad. Dropped off my daughter, picked up my daughter. And that went on for a while before I was called. The thought of working with a group of young people made me even more hesitant. But I went. I moved. And I did that because someone made the space to accommodate me. And they extended the invitation. Here's what happened when I started sharing. I realized how much I really didn't know. Not in a discouraging way, but in a hungry way. And this was actually before my theological formation. Every time I had to explain something, I went back to find out more. Every time a question stumped me, I went looking. I started going to Mass differently. Not just to receive, but to listen for what I could bring back. The homily began to make more sense. The gospel seemed clearer, because now it wasn't just for me. It was to share. Honestly, before this, I really dreaded going to church. Sometimes I embrace it, and sometimes I struggle with it. But now it's different, because now I'm sharing with a purpose. And by sharing, my faith deepened in a way that simply sitting in a pew didn't do. Sharing what I knew made me hungry for what I didn't know. I think about the woman by the well, for example, in John chapter 4. She didn't go looking for a theological lesson. She went to draw water by herself in the middle of the day for reasons that I guess the text would leave us to figure out. But Jesus met her there, in the ordinary, in her ordinary. He doesn't begin with a doctrine. He begins with her. He names what was true in her life. Not to expose her, but to see her. And she felt the difference. She felt seen. What does she do next? Is interesting. She leaves her water jar, the reason she came to the well in the first place. She goes back to the town where she'd been avoiding, to the same people, the same challenges, and she says to them, come and see. She doesn't have it all down pat. She didn't have all the answers. Matter of fact, she was still calling Jesus the man who told me everything I ever did. She hasn't worked out who he is yet. But she goes. And she goes with what she has. She had an encounter and a question. And that was enough. That's what moves a Pewist. Not more information alone. Not just head knowledge, but an encounter. And someone who creates the space to accommodate the journey. Has anyone ever called you, invited you to share your faith in somewhere, wherever your faith is? What would it take for you to go back to your town the way she did, with what you have, not with what you wish you had, and begin to share it? Before I go, I want to say something carefully. If you recognize yourself in this Pewist person, there is nothing wrong with you. Absolutely nothing. As a matter of fact, the Pewist is not a kind of failure in any way. The Pewist is someone who was formed to receive, not formed to share. They were educated in the faith. They know how to show up religiously, but they didn't know. No one journeyed with them on how to give what they received. Someone who has real questions and has found a safe place to ask them. A Pewist is someone who loves the church, has been hurt by it, but keeps showing up anyway. Someone who wants to share what they believe, but is afraid of judgment, afraid of not knowing enough, afraid of being seen perhaps as a hypocrite by people who they know and who know their everyday life outside of a Sunday. And you see that thing called fear? That fear is real. I know, I can tell you. But what I will also tell you is this. The faith you are sitting on right now, that faith is more than enough to begin with. The woman at the well didn't wait until she had it all figured out. She didn't even wait to be inspired or to be nudged. She went with an encounter and a question. Don't forget that part. She had questions. And the people came. They heard her. Showing up while you are still hurt, that's not weakness. Actually, that is how the healing begins to take place. So as Pewists, we are not stuck. We are actually on our way. We just need someone to walk alongside us for a while. And that's what this podcast is trying to be. That's what Growing Beyond the Pews is for. What would it take for what I know or for what you know to become what we share? Let's sit with that this week. If this episode spoke to you in any way, or describe someone you know? Let's share it. Let's get it out there. Use the hashtag the Pewist, because the first step to moving is naming where you are. In the next episode, we're going to talk about who else sees the Pewist and what that changes in them. Now, this person has always been there at the beginning of every real faith story. Someone who saw you before you even saw yourself. I am Andrew Fernandes, and this is Growing Beyond the Pew. Share it with someone today. May God bless you and your family, and I'll see you next time. Take care.